So I was looking at a podcast that's on the countercurrents. It's a guy called Nick Stilvey has a sort of a book review um, podcast that it does as part of Countercurrents, and he was having an interview the other night with Horace to talk about George Orwell's On the Road to Wigan Pier. That's a book that I listened to as an audio book, and I realised now I only ever listened to half of it, but the half I listened to I really enjoyed. So I was very interested to hear Nick's and Horace discuss the book. They were discussing it more in the context of just talking about George Orwell's politics as opposed to really doing a review of the book. And another point that Horace was making was that down and out in Paris and London, homage to Catalonia, on the road to Wigan Pier, and Burma Days, should be kind of read as a sort of a series of books outlining Orwell's politics. So I certainly would like to absorb the other books and see what I think of that. So anyway, they were basically talking about how the structure of the book was framed by Orwell referring to being at King Edward II's coronation or funeral. It was in the early 1930s, and which I can't remember which monarch specifically, but Orwell was standing in a crowd somewhere around like Leicester Square or somewhere, and he thought what struck him was how unwell everyone looked, how unvital everyone looked. And this is a major sort of theme in a lot of the Road to Wigan Pier, is how nutrition really affected the lives of the working class areas that Orwell was going to integrate himself into, and his theory that there was a lot of comfort eating going on even back then. Not problems with obesity, because there wasn't exactly an oversupply of food, but sugary tea and white bread, were very popular in the working class areas that he was living in at that time, to provide the material for his book. And it's a very, and I remember now, like there's lurid descriptions of the diets of mine workers and their families in the tenement houses that we're living in. It's gone into in fascinating detail. So the conclusion that the lads came to was that regardless of whether you're living in a time of plenty or not, in certain sort of socio-economic demographics, there is just a tendency to eat poorly and to eat comfort food, and it's a point worth noting. So another major part of what they talked about was Orwell's own socialism, and they were pondering why Orwell is described as the lefty, that the left loves to hate and that the right loves to love. The conclusion that Nix came to was that the fact of the matter is that a lot of the issues around how the working class were treated, or what their life they were kind of raised to expect to live, marries very closely to a lot of what would be contemporary right-wing points. Like there's an absence of sort of national identity. There's an absence of any sort of metaphysic, in terms of the obvious things like some sort of religious belief. It's all discouraged, you see, and even back then it was being too. People were being very malnourished, not just through their nutrition, but through what sort of life they were expected to lead. I suppose would be the best way to put it. And the conclusion that Nix and Horace came to is that, yes, indeed, the types of issues that Orwell was noting back then and the way he was framing those issues have in this day and age are kind of right wing talking points now. So there probably is a good bit of legitimacy to the proposition, or why the left now retrospectively are very, very unimpressed with George Orwell, and he's been adopted as an important intellectual thinker that anyone professing any sort of right-leaning position should be well aware of. And I would tend to agree with that. Just to kind of conclude, then they were just again saying the books are very worth reading because George Orwell is an excellent writer, and he really is. His descriptive voice is very good. He can be quite humorous, even though it's kind of acerbic wit. But there's a beating heart at the centre of it, and again, the two lads couldn't help but ponder what George Orwell would have made of the current times. And I know it's a bit of a sort of a exercise in futility, but it is. I think it'd be more interesting to ponder if he'd lived on for another 20 years throughout the 50s and 60s. What if he'd had that sort of a lifespan, how he might have evolved, because I think it would have been. Well, I think he would have remained deeply interested in the world around him and might have become a little bit disillusioned with some of his own thought positions underpinning a lot of his own politics. But we'll never know anyway. But my task now, of course, is to listen to the other half of that book and fully absorb it, and hopefully at some point get around to the rest of them. But yeah, I linked that podcast below for anyone who wants to look at it anyway. And Countercurrents and the Writer's Block are both have plenty of very, very interesting articles to read about a very wide range of subjects. And I'd certainly recommend it if anyone has any interest. So thanks for listening.